Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It was back in 2004, when I was just a teenager living in Dallas, Texas. My mom, Karen, was in her mid-40s then, and she had this weekly ritual that she absolutely loved. Thursday night bowling league at the old Pin Palace Lanes on the outskirts of the city. It was one of those classic spots. Faded neon signs, the constant clatter of pins, the smell of greasy fries and shoe polish mixing in the air. Mom's team was called the Strike Queens, a group of about a dozen women from all walks of life. Mostly moms and working ladies looking for a break from the daily grind. Her best friend on the team was Linda, a chatty nurse who'd been bowling with her for years. They'd laugh, share stories, and occasionally sneak a beer or two after their games. The trouble started subtly on one of those humid Texas evenings in early spring. Mom and Linda were among the last to leave that night, around 10:30 p.m., after wrapping up their scores and chatting with the others. As they stepped out the back exit, the one that led to the employee and overflow parking lot, they noticed this tan sedan parked about 50 feet away, right at the edge of the lot where the lights started to dim. It was an older model, maybe a late 90s Toyota or Honda. Nothing flashy, but the engine was idling softly, like the driver was just waiting. No one got out, and the windows were tinted just enough that you couldn't see inside clearly. At first, they shrugged it off. Dallas has its share of weirdos, and parking lots can attract all sorts. But as they walked to their cars, the sedan's headlights flicked on suddenly, bathing the area in a harsh white glow. It wasn't aggressive, but it felt watchful. Mom mentioned it to Linda, who joked that maybe it was some guy waiting for his wife to finish her shift at the alley. They drove home without much thought, but Mom told me about it the next morning over breakfast. Creepy, but probably nothing, she said, buttering her toast. The next Thursday rolled around, and the same thing happened. This time, more people noticed. A couple of other league members, including a woman named Sarah, who was in her late 20s, a single mom with a bubbly personality and a job at a local bank, mentioned seeing the car as they left. It was parked in almost the exact same spot, idling again. Every time someone exited the building, those headlights would snap on, like a predator's eyes lighting up in the dark. It wasn't just flicking on once. It had happened multiple times as groups trickled out. The alley manager, a gruff guy named Bob who'd run the place for decades, got wind of it and called the police. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later, blue lights flashing silently as they pulled into the lot. But by then, the sedan was gone. No trace, no tire marks, nothing. The cops took a report, advised everyone to buddy up when leaving, and that was that. Mom came home a bit rattled this time, locking the doors extra carefully and peeking out the windows before bed. Week 3 was when the unease turned into real fear. The league had a full turnout that night, and whispers about the stalker car were buzzing before the games even started. People parked closer to the building, and Bob stationed himself near the back door with a flashlight. Sure enough, as closing time approached, there it was again. Tan sedan, idling, headlights flicking on with every person who stepped outside. This time, a few brave souls tried to approach it. One of the husbands who'd come to pick up his wife even yelled out, "Hey, what are you doing here?" But the car just revved its engine slightly and stayed put, headlights glaring. Bob called the cops again, and the League waited inside until they arrived. Officers canvassed the area, shone their spotlights around. But once more, the sedan had vanished before they got there. The police suggested it might be a prankster or someone homeless using the lot for shelter. But they promised to patrol the area more frequently on Thursdays. By the fourth week, the atmosphere at the bowling alley had shifted. What used to be a fun escape felt tense, like everyone was on edge. Mom and Linda stuck close together, and Sarah, the young woman from the bank, joked nervously about bringing pepper spray next time. She was always the optimistic one, trying to lighten the mood with stories about her kids' latest antics. That night, the games wrapped up around 10 p.m., and people left in larger groups. Mom said goodbye to Sarah in the lot, watching her get into her blue Honda Civic before driving off herself. The sedan was there again, but with the increased vigilance, it seemed to keep its distance. No headlight flicks this time, or at least none that anyone reported. The next morning, Mom got a frantic call from Linda. Sarah hadn't made it home. Her roommate had waited up, then called her cell, which went straight to voicemail. By noon, the police were involved. They found Sarah's car about 2 miles away, abandoned on a quiet side street near a wooded area. The keys were still in the ignition, the door slightly ajar, as if she'd been pulled out in a hurry. Her purse was inside, wallet untouched, but her phone was missing. No signs of a struggle in the car itself, but tire tracks nearby suggested another vehicle had been there. The League was devastated. Mom spent the day in tears, replaying every moment from the night before. The investigation kicked into high gear. Dallas PD questioned everyone at the alley. League members, staff, even regulars who'd been there that night. They pulled security footage from the bowling alley's grainy cameras, which showed the tan sedan lurking but never clearly captured the license plate or driver. Descriptions varied. Some said the driver looked like a middle-aged man with a beard. Others couldn't tell. Flyers went up around town, and the local news ran a segment on it, warning women to be cautious in parking lots. Mom and Linda went down to the station multiple times, sharing every detail they could remember about the previous weeks. The cops theorized it could be connected to the sedan, maybe a stalker who'd been casing the place for victims. Weeks turned into months, and the case dragged on. Mom stopped going to the League for a while, too shaken, and the strike queens dwindled as people drifted away out of fear. But then, in late summer, a break came. A tip from a mechanic in a neighboring town led police to a suspect, a 52-year-old man named Robert Harlan, who owned a tan 1998 Toyota Camry. He'd been arrested for a minor DUI, and during the impound, officers noticed scratches onto the car that matched descriptions from witnesses. Harlan had a history of loitering complaints and a prior conviction for harassment in the 90s. Under questioning, he cracked. He admitted to parking at various lots around Dallas, including the bowling alley, because he was going through a messy divorce and used the time to watch people as a way to cope with loneliness. But he swore he wasn't involved in Sarah's disappearance. The police didn't buy it at first, but further investigation revealed the truth. Sarah's phone records showed she'd been texting a new boyfriend that night, someone she'd met online. Turns out the boyfriend, a guy named Mike from Fort Worth, had a jealous ex who confronted Sarah on her drive home. It escalated into a roadside argument, and in the heat of the moment, the ex shoved Sarah, who hit her head on the pavement and passed out. Panicking, the ex drove her to a nearby ER under a fake name, then fled. Sarah woke up with a concussion but no memory of the incident at first. She'd wandered off confused, hitched a ride to a friend's house, and only pieced it together days later when the news broke. By then, she'd been too scared and embarrassed to come forward immediately. Sarah turned up safe about 3 months after vanishing, contacting the police herself. She corroborated the story, and the ex was arrested for assault and fleeing the scene. As for Harlan and his sedan, he was charged with trespassing and issued a restraining order from the bowling alley, but nothing linked him to Sarah. It was all a tragic coincidence. The creepy watcher was real, but harmless in this case, just a lonely guy making bad choices. The league eventually reformed, with better lighting in the lot and a buddy system that stuck around for years. Mom still talks about it sometimes, over coffee with Linda. It taught us all to trust our instincts, but also not to jump to the worst conclusions. Dallas moved on, and so did we, though Mom never parks far from the door anymore. It was a crisp autumn Friday in Buffalo, New York, back in October 1990. The city was winding down from a long work week, with the first hints of winter chill creeping into the air. Mike Thompson, a lanky 17-year-old with a mop of dark hair and a perpetual smirk, had just started his senior year at Kensington High School. He wasn't the star athlete or the class valedictorian, but he had a tight-knit group of friends who shared his love for simple thrills, arcade games, cheap pizza, and nights out at the local bowling alley. That evening, Mike and 3 of his buddies, Jake, Chris, and Danny, piled into Jake's beat-up Ford Escort and headed to Volker's bowling alley on Clinton Street. It was a popular spot, buzzing with families, league bowlers, and teens like them looking to kill time. The place smelled of polished wood, popcorn, and faint cigarette smoke from the designated areas. They rented a lane, laced up their rented shoes, and spent the first couple of hours laughing over gutter balls and strikes. Mike was on a roll, trash-talking his friends about his superior technique while sipping on a soda. He was in good spirits, or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. Around 9 p.m., as the game wrapped up and the alley's fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the lanes, Mike pulled out a pack of Marlboros from his jacket pocket. "Gonna step out for a smoke," he announced casually, shrugging on his worn denim jacket with the frayed cuffs. His friends nodded, too focused on settling the score to pay much attention. "Don't take too long, man. We're heading to the diner after this," Chris called after him. Security footage from the alley's grainy black and white cameras captured Mike clearly. He pushed open the side door leading to the parking lot, a puff of breath visible in the cool night air as he lit his cigarette just outside. The door swung shut behind him, and that was the last clear image anyone had of him that night. The lot was dimly lit, with a few cars scattered around, but no other cameras covered the perimeter. No one reported seeing him wander off, hail a cab, or climb into a vehicle. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole. Inside, the friends finished their game and waited. 10 minutes turned into 20, then half an hour. They checked the bathrooms, the arcade section, even the front entrance. No sign of Mike. Jake stepped outside to call his name, scanning the lot under the sodium vapor lamps, but it was empty save for a couple of bowlers heading to their cars. By 10 p.m., worry set in. They alerted the manager, who reviewed the tapes and confirmed Mike had exited but hadn't reappeared on any interior feeds. That's when things got stranger. While searching the premises, Danny spotted Mike's denim jacket draped neatly over the top of a pinball machine in the arcade corner. A machine themed around some old sci-fi movie, its lights flickering invitingly. The jacket was unmistakable. It had a small rip on the sleeve from a skateboarding mishap the previous summer. And Mike's wallet was still tucked in the inner pocket, complete with his ID, a few bucks, and a photo of his family. But the footage showed no one returning through any door after Mike left. How had the jacket gotten back inside? The manager swore the arcade area was covered by cameras, yet there was no glitch, no blind spot evident in the review. It was baffling. But in the heat of the moment, the friends assumed Mike must have slipped back in unnoticed, maybe to ditch the jacket before leaving for good. The police were called that night. Buffalo PD treated it initially as a runaway case. Mike was 17, old enough to make impulsive decisions. But his family painted a different picture. Mike's home life wasn't perfect. His parents were going through a messy divorce, and he'd confided in friends about feeling trapped, overwhelmed by the constant arguments and pressure to choose sides. He'd mentioned once, half-jokingly, about hitchhiking to California to start fresh, away from the snow and the drama. Still, he hadn't packed a bag, hadn't said goodbye, and left behind his wallet and jacket. Flyers went up around town, local news ran a segment, and detectives interviewed everyone at the alley that night. No leads surfaced. Weeks turned into months, and Mike's case joined the stack of unsolved disappearances haunting the department. Years passed, and Buffalo changed. The bowling alley got renovated. Friends graduated and moved on, starting families of their own. Mike's parents never stopped searching, hiring private investigators, and appearing on missing persons shows. The mystery of the jacket lingered as a peculiar detail, fueling rumors and theories among locals. Maybe a camera malfunction, or someone else placed it there as a prank gone wrong. Then, in 2005, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A detective revisiting cold cases in Buffalo cross-referenced Mike's file with national databases and hit on a match. A man named Michael Harris, living quietly in Chicago as a mechanic, had been flagged during a routine background check for a job. His fingerprints, taken after a minor traffic stop, matched Mike's from an old school record. It turned out Mike hadn't vanished into thin air. He'd walked out that side door, finished his smoke, and on a whim, flagged down a trucker in the lot headed west on I-90. Overwhelmed by family stress and teenage angst, he decided to bail, hitching rides until he landed in the Windy City. He'd slipped back into the alley briefly through an unmonitored employee entrance, a side door the cameras missed due to poor angles, to leave his jacket and wallet, symbolically shedding his old life without alerting anyone. Mike, now Michael, had built a new existence, changed his last name informally, got his GED, learned a trade, and even started a family. He explained in his reunion statement that guilt had kept him silent for years. He'd watched from afar as the search unfolded, but feared the repercussions of returning. The jacket on the pinball machine? A hasty decision. He'd always loved that game and thought it a fitting spot to leave a piece of himself behind. The reunion was bittersweet. Mike's parents, aged but relieved, forgave him over tears and hugs. His friends, now in their 30s, reconnected via phone calls filled with shock and relief. There was no foul play, no sinister force. Just a scared kid making a rash choice in the heat of a difficult moment. Mike returned to Buffalo for visits, mending fences and sharing stories of his lost years. The case closed not with horror, but with the quiet reality of human frailty and second chances. It was back in 2011, when I was in my early 20s and scraping by with a night shift job at a rundown bowling alley on the outskirts of Fresno, California. The place was called Strike Zone Lanes. Nothing fancy, just a spot where locals came to knock down pins, drink cheap beer, and forget about their day. I handled the closing duties mostly, cleaning up spills, resetting the lanes, and dealing with the trash that piled up from greasy snacks and empty pitchers. The hours were brutal, from 8 p.m. until around 2 a.m. But it paid the bills, and the other employees were like a quirky little family. We'd joke around during the slow periods, sharing stories about weird customers or complaining about the flickering fluorescent lights that always seemed on the verge of burning out. One particular night in late summer, it must have been August, because the air was still thick with that Central Valley heat even after midnight. Things were winding down as usual. The last group of bowlers had left about an hour earlier, leaving behind a mess of discarded score sheets and half-eaten nachos. I was the one on trash duty that shift, so I gathered up the bulging black bags from the kitchen area and headed toward the back exit. The alley was dimly lit back there, with just a single bulb casting long shadows over the concrete floor. The back door led straight out to a dimly lit parking lot that backed onto a chain-link fence and some overgrown weeds. Nothing but darkness beyond that, especially since the lot lights had been busted for weeks and management was too cheap to fix them right away. As I approached the door, lugging the trash bags, I noticed it was propped open just a crack, maybe an inch or two. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had a couple of smokers on staff, and sometimes they'd sneak out for a quick break without fully latching the door behind them. Great, I muttered to myself, figuring I'd have to remind everyone again about locking up properly. I set the bags down, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door toward me to shut it tight. But as it started to close, something jammed it. A sudden resistance that made my heart skip a beat. Before I could process what was happening, a man's hand shot through the gap, fingers splayed out like claws, gripping the edge of the door to stop it from closing. It was pale, with dirt under the nails, and the force behind it was strong, way too deliberate to be an accident. I froze for a split second, my mind racing through possibilities. Was it a homeless guy looking for shelter? A drunk customer who'd wandered around back? But then I saw the glint of a watch on his wrist, and the way his knuckles whitened as he pushed back. This wasn't random. Adrenaline kicked in, and I let out a scream that echoed through the empty hallway, loud enough to rattle the pins in the lanes up front. The hand recoiled instantly, and I heard footsteps scrambling away on the gravel outside. I slammed the door shut with all my strength, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the deadbolt. By the time I turned it, I was already yelling for my coworker, Mike, who was mopping the front area. He came running, and together we checked the door from the inside. No one there, just the empty lot stretching into the night. We didn't see the guy, but I caught a fleeting glimpse of a shadow disappearing around the corner of the building toward the main road. Mike grabbed his phone and called the police while I tried to catch my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. The cops arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers in a patrol car, flashing their lights, but no siren. They took my statement, shone their flashlights around the lot, and even dusted the door for prints, though they warned me that outdoor surfaces like that often didn't yield much. I described what I could. The hand, the watch, silver, I think, with a black band. And the way the guy had bolted without a word. They seemed to take it seriously, asking if I'd noticed anyone suspicious inside earlier or if the door had been tampered with before. We hadn't, but they mentioned they'd checked the security cameras. Turns out, the one over the back door, was working, though the footage was grainy and only caught a partial silhouette of a man in dark clothes lurking near the dumpster before approaching. A couple of days later, after I'd had time to process and get back to work, with the door now double-checked every hour, the police followed up with a phone call. They connected the incident to a pattern they'd been tracking in the area. A string of attempted abductions targeting employees at late-night businesses like gas stations, diners, and, bowling alleys. The MO was similar. Suspects would tamper with back doors or create distractions to lure people out alone, often through rear exits where there were fewer witnesses. They'd linked at least 3 other cases in Fresno and nearby towns that summer, all involving young women or isolated workers. The officers believed this guy had been watching our place, waiting for someone like me to step out with the trash. It chilled me to think how close I'd come. But they assured me that my scream likely scared him off before he could do anything more. In the end, the suspect was never caught, at least not for our incident. The cases went cold after a while, with no solid leads from the prints or footage. Maybe he moved on, or perhaps he got picked up for something else unrelated. The police increased patrols in the area for a few months, and our manager finally sprang for better lighting and a new alarm system on the back door. We all started buddying up for closing tasks, no one going out alone anymore. I stuck with the job for another year before moving on to something with daylight hours. But I still think about that night sometimes. It taught me to trust my instincts and not brush off the little things, like a door left ajar. Life went back to normal, though. Fresno kept being Fresno, with its hot summers and quiet nights, and I was just grateful to have walked away unscathed. When I was 15, back in the summer of 2010, I got invited to a birthday party that still sticks with me. Not because it was fun or memorable in the usual way, but because of how strangely empty and unresolved it felt at the time. The kid who invited me was named Alex. He was in a couple of my classes at our small high school in suburban Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, at least on the surface. Alex was quiet, a bit awkward, with oversized glasses and a habit of doodling intricate spaceships in his notebooks during history class. He wasn't unpopular exactly, just on the periphery. We'd chatted a few times about video games, stuff like Halo and Minecraft back when it was new, and he always seemed nice enough, if a little intense when he got talking about sci-fi books. The invitation came in the mail, which was already kind of old school even then. It was one of those generic birthday cards from the dollar store, with balloons and cake on the front. And inside, he'd handwritten the details. His 16th birthday party at the local bowling alley, Starlight Lanes, on Saturday, July 17th at 2 p.m. He'd even specified lane number 12, which I thought was oddly precise. "Bring your A game for strikes," he'd scrawled at the bottom with a smiley face. I wasn't super close to him, but I figured why not. It was summer break, I was bored, and bowling sounded like a low-key way to hang out. I picked up a gift, a used copy of a Star Wars novel I'd seen him reading about, and headed over on my bike that afternoon. Starlight Lanes was this run-down spot on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like old popcorn and rented shoes, with neon signs flickering in the windows and a mini arcade in the corner that ate quarters like candy. When I walked in, the place was quieter than I'd expected for a Saturday. Only a handful of families were bowling. A dad teaching his little kids on Lane 5. A group of older guys on Lane 8 laughing over beers. No big crowds, no birthday chaos. I went up to the front desk, gift bag in hand, and asked the guy behind the counter, a bored-looking college kid with a name tag that said Mike, if he knew where Alex's party was. Mike checked his computer, frowning. Alex who? We don't have any parties booked under that name today. You sure it's here? I pulled out the invitation and showed him the details. He shrugged. Lane 12. That's open right now. No reservation on it. Maybe it's a mix-up. Confused, I thanked him and wandered over to Lane 12 anyway, figuring maybe Alex had just shown up early or something. And there it was. The setup looked exactly like a party waiting to happen. A cluster of helium balloons, red, blue, and silver, were tied to the backs of the plastic chairs around the scoring table. In the middle sat a sheet cake from the local grocery store. Vanilla with chocolate frosting, the kind with those piped edges, and Happy Birthday, Alex, written in blue icing. There were even paper plates, plastic forks, and a stack of napkins folded neatly beside it. But no one was there. No Alex, no parents, no other kids from school. The lane was dark, the pins standing silent at the end. I stood there for a minute, feeling like an idiot, checking my phone, which was just a basic flip phone back then, no apps or anything, to see if I'd gotten the time wrong. Nope, 2 p.m. on the dot. I sat down awkwardly on one of the chairs, the balloons bobbing gently in the air conditioning, and waited maybe 10 or 15 minutes. A couple of families nearby glanced over curiously, but no one said anything. Finally, one of the workers, a middle-aged woman with a ponytail and a Starlight Lanes polo shirt, came over while she was wiping down a nearby table. "You okay, hon? Waiting for someone?" I explained about the invitation and pointed to the cake and balloons. Her face kind of scrunched up, and she looked at the setup like she'd seen a ghost. "That's weird. We had a party cancellation a few weeks back. Some kid's birthday, yeah. The family called it off, said something about a family emergency, and we cleared out their stuff. Threw away the old balloons and everything. But this looks just like it." She poked at the cake box cautiously, like it might bite. "We didn't put this here. Maybe someone brought it in today by mistake." It didn't make sense, but I didn't push it. I felt too embarrassed to stick around, so I mumbled something about maybe having the wrong day, left the gift on the table, figuring if Alex showed up later, he'd get it, and biked home. The whole thing bugged me for the rest of the weekend. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if it was a prank or if I'd misread the invitation. But Alex had seemed genuine when he handed it to me at school before break. School started back up in late August, and Alex wasn't there. His desk in history stayed empty, and when I asked our teacher about it, she just said he'd transferred out. No details. A couple of kids whispered rumors, stuff like his parents splitting up or money troubles, but nothing concrete. I even tried looking him up on Facebook a few times. It was still pretty new then. But his profile was basic and hadn't been updated. Eventually, I let it go. High school moved on, and so did I. Years later, when I was home from college for Thanksgiving, I ran into our old history teacher at the grocery store. We got to chatting about old times, and Alex's name came up. Turns out, his family had gone through a rough patch. His dad lost his job at the factory in town, and they had to move in with relatives a couple of states away pretty suddenly. The birthday party had been planned, but with everything falling apart, they canceled it last minute. Alex didn't tell anyone at school, because he was embarrassed, I guess. As for the decorations at the bowling alley that day, my teacher didn't know, but when I thought back on it, it was probably just a coincidence or a mix-up. Maybe another party had used Lane 12 earlier and left their stuff behind, or the staff hadn't cleared everything from the cancellation properly. Starlight Lanes was always a bit disorganized. Cheap labor, high turnover. The cake could have been dropped off by Alex's mom in a haze of stress, forgetting to pick it up after the cancellation. Looking back, it wasn't some big mystery. It was just life being messy. Families fall apart, plans change, and sometimes you're left standing in an empty bowling alley wondering what happened. Alex? I heard through the grapevine he ended up okay. Went to community college, got into graphic design. We never reconnected, but I like to think he had better birthdays after that. A few years ago, back in the summer of 2018, I had one of those unsettling experiences that sticks with you, even though it turned out to be mostly harmless in the end. My friends and I, there were 5 of us, including my best buddy Mike, his girlfriend Sarah, and a couple of others from our college days, decided to hit up this old-school bowling alley on the outskirts of town. It was a Friday night, pushing midnight, and the place had that classic dive vibe. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of greasy pizza from the snack bar mingling with the faint odor of rented shoes, and the rhythmic crash of pins echoing through the mostly empty lanes. We were there to unwind after a long week, laughing over bad throws and chugging cheap beer from plastic cups. We'd booked Lane 7, and things started off great. I was up first in our group, grabbing a beat-up 12-pound ball that felt a little sticky from who knows how many hands. As I lined up my shot, trying to remember the basics from the one bowling class I'd taken in high school, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. 2 lanes over, in lane 9, there was this older guy, probably in his late 60s or early 70s. Sitting alone on one of those plastic benches. He wasn't bowling, no ball, no shoes on his feet, just socks, which struck me as odd even then, and no drink or food in sight. He was just perched there, staring straight ahead, or so I thought at first. I shook it off, focused on my throw, and managed a decent spare. But when I turned back to high-five Sarah, I noticed his head had swiveled slightly, eyes locked on me as I walked back to our seats. Coincidence, right? The alley was dimly lit beyond the lanes, with shadows pooling in the corners where the arcade machines hummed faintly, so maybe he was just zoning out. We kept playing, rotating turns, and the group was in high spirits. Mike was trash-talking everyone's form, and we were all cracking up over Sarah's gutter balls. But every time it was my turn again, I'd feel that prickly sensation on the back of my neck. Sure enough, a quick glance confirmed it. The guy's gaze followed me like a spotlight. He wasn't smiling or frowning, just this blank, intense stare, his hands folded in his lap, body perfectly still. It wasn't leering or aggressive, but it was unwavering. I mentioned it quietly to Mike during his turn. "Dude, that old guy over there keeps watching me. It's freaking me out a bit." Mike peeked over casually and shrugged. "Probably just bored. Or maybe he's scouting for the senior league, thinks you've got potential." We chuckled, but I could tell Mike was keeping an eye out now, too. To test it, I suggested switching seats with Sarah midway through the game. She was game, thinking it was just paranoia on my part. But nope. When I got up from my new spot, his eyes zeroed in on me again, ignoring everyone else. Sarah noticed it too and whispered, "Okay, that's weird. He's not even pretending to look away." The group's vibe shifted a little then. The laughter got a bit forced, and we started glancing over more often. The alley wasn't crowded. Maybe a dozen other people scattered around, including a family with kids a few lanes away and some rowdy guys at the bar. But it felt isolated in our corner. After about 20 minutes of this, the guy suddenly stood up. He was taller than I'd expected, with a slight stoop, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans that looked like they'd seen better days. He shuffled over slowly, not in a menacing way, but deliberately, and plopped down at the empty table right behind ours, maybe 5 feet away. My heart rate picked up. I could feel the adrenaline starting to buzz. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, still watching. Then, as I was pretending to fiddle with my phone to avoid eye contact, he leaned forward slightly and murmured in a raspy voice, barely audible over the lane noise, "You remind me of someone I used to know." That was it for us. I froze for a second, then turned to the group and said, "Let's bounce. This is getting too creepy." We didn't even finish the game. Grabbed our jackets, returned the shoes in a hurry, and headed for the exit. As we left, I glanced back one last time. He was still sitting there, but now his eyes were downcast, like he'd lost interest or maybe realized he'd overstepped. The front desk attendant, a bored-looking woman in her 40s, asked if everything was okay when we turned in our score sheet early. We told her about the guy, and she nodded knowingly. "Oh, that's Harold. He's a regular, harmless, but yeah. He can be a bit off sometimes. Lost his wife a while back, comes here to reminisce because they used to bowl together. I'll keep an eye on him." It didn't fully ease the tension, but it made sense in a sad way. We piled into Mike's car and drove to a 24-hour diner instead, where we decompressed over pancakes and coffee, rehashing the whole thing. In hindsight, it was probably just a lonely old man seeing a ghost from his past in my face. Maybe I had a similar build or haircut to his son or a friend or whoever. Nothing escalated, and we got out safe. But it taught me to trust my gut about personal space. These days, I still bowl occasionally, but I always scan the crowd first. It was the summer of 1982 in Portland, Oregon. A time when the city was buzzing with the usual mix of rainy days, emerging punk scenes, and folks unwinding at places like the old Riverside Bowling Alley on the east side. I was the night janitor there. Name's Earl Thompson, back then a 42-year-old guy just trying to make ends meet after a stint in the Navy. The alley was one of those classic spots. Neon lights flickering over 20 lanes, the constant clatter of pins, and that unmistakable smell of shoe polish mixed with greasy fries from the snack bar. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and most nights were routine. Mopping floors, emptying trash, and dealing with the occasional drunk who thought the bathroom was a good place to pass out. The trouble started with that damn bathroom stall in the women's restroom. It was the end one, closest to the wall. And for months, we'd been having issues with it. The lock was some cheap latch that never quite caught right. Employees would lock it during cleaning to keep people out, but it'd pop open on its own, or sometimes jam shut if you weren't careful. The owner, Mr. Hargrove, was too stingy to fix it properly. He'd just tell us to jiggle the handle or use a screwdriver to pry it. We'd laugh about it in the break room, calling it the haunted stall as a joke, but it was more annoyance than anything spooky. One Tuesday night in late June, around closing time, must have been about 11:30 p.m. I was doing my final rounds. The alley had cleared out except for a couple of stragglers finishing their beers at the bar. I pushed open the door to the women's bathroom, mop in hand, and noticed the end stall was shut tight. The little indicator showed occupied in red. I knocked politely, like always. "Anyone in there? We're closing up." No answer. I waited a beat, knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Figured maybe someone had passed out or was sick. Wouldn't be the first time. I called over Manny, our security guy, a burly ex-cop in his 50s who moonlighted with us. He grumbled but came quick. Manny banged on the door with his fist. "Ma'am, you okay in there? Open up or we're coming in." Silence. We exchanged looks. Protocol was to force it if there was no response, in case of an emergency. Manny wedged his boot against the door and gave it a solid kick. The cheap lock gave way with a crack, and the door swung inward. But the stall was empty. No one on the toilet, no feet visible, nothing. We checked under the partitions, behind the door. Zip. The window above was tiny, sealed shut, and way too high for anyone to climb out without a ladder. Manny scratched his head and muttered something about kids messing around, maybe locking it from the inside and slipping out before we noticed. I shrugged it off too. Locks jam, people prank. We fixed the door as best we could and called it a night. Hargrove bitched about the repair cost the next day, but that was that. A week later, on a Wednesday, July 6th, I remember because it was right after the 4th of July weekend, the same thing happened. I was mopping again. Later than usual since we'd had a league tournament that ran long. Pushed into the women's bathroom around midnight, and there it was, end stall locked, red indicator glaring. Knocked. No answer. Called Manny over again. This time, though, something caught my eye as I bent down to peer under the door. A black leather purse lying on the tile floor, right in the middle of the stall like it had been dropped. "Hey, Manny, there's a bag in there. Looks like someone's stuff." We knocked harder, shouted, but still nothing. Manny kicked the door open, same as before. Flimsy lock popping easy. Stall empty. No person, no signs of struggle. Just that purse sitting there innocently. We didn't touch it at first, but Manny gloved up with some paper towels and picked it up. Inside was a wallet with an Oregon driver's license. Sarah Elaine Mitchell, 28 years old, address in the Selwood neighborhood. Pretty woman, blonde hair in the photo, smiling like she had her whole life ahead. There was some cash, credit cards, a few receipts, one from a grocery store dated 3 days earlier, and a keychain with what looked like house keys. Manny's face went pale. He recognized the name from the news. Sarah had been reported missing by her roommate on Sunday after she didn't come home from a night out downtown. No leads, just vanished into thin air. We called the cops right away. Portland PD showed up within 20 minutes. 2 detectives, Ramirez and Klein, plus a couple of uniforms. They cordoned off the bathroom, took our statements, and dusted everything for prints. I told them about the stall's history, the previous lockup. They searched the place top to bottom, pulled up ceiling tiles, checked the plumbing access panels, even brought in a K9 unit to sniff around. Nothing. No hidden compartments, no blood, no fibers that didn't belong. The stall was just a standard metal partition setup. No way anyone could hide in or escape from it without being seen. They bagged the purse as evidence and hauled it to the station. Hargrove closed the alley early the next day for more searches, grumbling about lost business. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Sarah's disappearance made the local papers. The Oregonian ran a front-page story with her photo, asking for tips. But police interviewed everyone, her friends, family, ex-boyfriend. Turned out she worked as a teller at a bank downtown and had been out at a bar with co-workers the night she vanished. Last seen leaving alone around 10 p.m. No enemies, no debts, just a normal life interrupted. They grilled me and Manny too, but we had alibis and nothing to hide. The stall? They tested the lock. Turns out it was defective, prone to engaging on its own if the door slammed hard enough from vibrations in the building, like from the bowling lanes. That explained the random lockups, at least partially. But the purse, that was the puzzle. Months passed, and the case went cold. Then, in October, the purse vanished from the evidence room at the precinct. Just gone one day during an inventory check. No sign of break-in, no logs of it being checked out. The department launched an internal investigation. Turned out a rookie evidence clerk, guy named Derek Voss, had sticky fingers. He'd been pilfering small items for months. Jewelry from drug busts, cash from wallets. Voss confessed when they leaned on him. Said he saw the purse, figured it was forgotten in the shuffle of a cold case, and swiped it to pawn the contents. No connection to Sarah's disappearance, just opportunistic theft. He got fired, charged with tampering, and did a short stint in county jail. As for Sarah, that part resolved in the saddest, most ordinary way. In early 1983, hikers found her remains in Forest Park, about 5 miles from the bowling alley. Autopsy showed she'd been strangled, likely the night she went missing. No sexual assault, no robbery. Her jewelry was still on her. Police pieced it together. Her ex-boyfriend, a jealous type named Mark Reynolds, with a history of domestic calls, had followed her from the bar. They argued, things escalated, and he dumped her body in the woods. Reynolds had an alibi at first, friends covering for him, but one cracked under questioning. He confessed, got life without parole. How'd the purse end up in our stall? Reynolds admitted planting it there a few days later, hoping to throw off the trail, make it look like she'd been at the bowling alley or something random. He'd broken into the bathroom during the day when it was busy, waited for a moment alone, locked the stall from inside, dropped the purse, and climbed over the partition into the next stall to slip out unnoticed. The lock jamming on its own helped sell the mystery. It was all misdirection, nothing more. The alley fixed that stall lock after everything, and life went back to normal. I worked there another 5 years before retiring. Still think about Sarah sometimes. How a faulty door and a coward's panic turned a simple night into something that haunted us all for a while. But in the end, it wasn't ghosts or vanishings, just human error and human evil, wrapped up tight as any case could be. It was the summer of 1997, and I was just 15 years old. working my first real job at Lucky Lane's bowling alley on the outskirts of Detroit. My folks thought it would build character, flipping burgers and pouring sodas at the snack bar for minimum wage. The place was a relic from the 70s, with faded neon signs, scuffed lanes that smelled like old shoe polish, and a jukebox that still played Motown hits on scratched-up CDs. I worked the evening shift most nights, from 5 p.m. until closing at midnight, serving up greasy fries and cheap beer to league bowlers, families wrapping up birthday parties, and the occasional group of rowdy teens. That particular Friday night started out like any other. The alley was moderately busy. A women's league wrapping up their games, a few couples on dates knocking down pins, and some kids messing around in the arcade corner. Around 11 p.m., as things were winding down, this guy walked in. He looked to be in his early 40s, average build, wearing a plain gray jacket over a button-up shirt, jeans, and scuffed work boots. Nothing flashy about him. He could have been any blue-collar worker from the auto plants nearby. He approached the snack bar counter where I was wiping down the soda machine, and in a quiet, unassuming voice, he ordered a black coffee. I poured it from the pot we'd brewed earlier. It wasn't fresh, but at that hour, no one complained. He paid with exact change, didn't say much else, and carried the styrofoam cup over to a table at the far end of the lanes, near lane 12, which was empty. I didn't think much of it. People came in late sometimes, just to kill time or sober up before driving home. He sat there, staring out at the lanes, not bowling, not talking to anyone, just occasionally glancing at his watch. The coffee sat in front of him, steam rising at first, but he never took a sip. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the manager, a gruff guy named Mr. Harlan, who'd been running the place for decades, started making his rounds, turning off the pin setters, dimming the lights, and herding the last stragglers out. I finished mopping the snack bar floor, cashed out the register, and clocked out around 12:05 a.m. Mr. Harlan locked the front doors behind us, flipped the closed sign, and we all headed to our cars in the parking lot. It was a chilly night for summer, with that damp Michigan air, and I remember biking home under the streetlights, thinking about the tip jar haul. Maybe enough for a new cassette tape. The next morning, I wasn't scheduled to work until the afternoon, but I got a call from Mr. Harlan around 8 a.m. His voice was shaky, which was unusual for him. He was usually all bark. "Kid, you remember that guy who came in late last night? The one with the coffee?" he asked. I said yeah, vaguely. Turns out, when Mr. Harlan arrived at 7 a.m. to open up, he found the man still sitting in the exact same chair, in the exact same spot. The coffee cup was stone cold, untouched, not a drop missing. The alley had been pitch black and locked up tight all night. No alarms tripped, no signs of forced entry. Mr. Harlan thought maybe the guy had passed out or something, but when he approached, the man just looked up calmly and said, "Morning." No explanation, no panic. Mr. Harlan freaked out a bit and called the police right away, figuring it was some kind of break-in or medical emergency. While waiting for them, he reviewed the security tapes, grainy black and white footage from the two cameras we had, one over the entrance and one overlooking the lanes. Sure enough, the tape showed the man walking in at 11:02 p.m., ordering at the snack bar and sitting down. But there was no footage of him leaving. The tape ran until closing, then jumped to the morning when Mr. Harlan unlocked the doors. It was like he'd vanished into thin air and reappeared. By the time the cops arrived, 2 officers from the local precinct, the man was cooperative but vague. He gave his name as Robert Klein, said he was from nearby Warren, and claimed he'd just dozed off after closing. But that didn't add up. The lights were out, the place was empty, and he'd have had to hide somewhere without triggering the motion sensors or the door alarms. The police questioned all of us staff that day. Me, the other snack bar kid, the lane attendants, even the night janitor. I told them what I remembered. The coffee order, the quiet demeanor, nothing out of the ordinary. They checked the parking lot for his car, but there was no vehicle matching his description. A blue sedan he said he'd parked out back. Turns out, the back lot wasn't covered by cameras, just the front. They ran his name through their system, and it came back clean. No warrants, no missing persons report. Klein stuck to his story, insisting he must have sleepwalked or something after we closed, maybe hid in the bathroom during the final sweep. Mr. Harlan admitted later that the janitor sometimes skimped on checking every nook, especially the storage closet near the far lanes. In the end, after a couple hours of back and forth, the cops chalked it up to a combination of human error and a faulty camera tape. Those old VHS systems glitched sometimes, skipping frames or failing to record properly during low-light hours. Klein apologized profusely, said he hadn't meant to cause trouble, and even offered to pay for a replacement coffee. Mr. Harlan, not wanting bad publicity for the alley, let it go without pressing charges. The man left on foot saying he'd call a friend for a ride, and that was that. We never saw him again, and no car was ever reported abandoned in the lot. For weeks afterward, the staff joked about it being a ghost story, but deep down, we figured he was just some down-on-his-luck guy who'd snuck in to crash for the night, maybe homeless, or avoiding going home to a fight with his wife. Detroit in the 90s had plenty of folks like that, scraping by. Looking back now, as an adult, it doesn't seem so mysterious. Security wasn't airtight back then. No fancy digital systems, just tapes that wore out and employees who cut corners. Klein probably slipped out a side door after closing, realized he was locked out, and snuck back in through a window or something during the night. Or maybe he never left at all, and just hid well. Either way, it taught me a lesson about paying attention to the details at work. Lucky Lanes closed down in 2005, turned into a strip mall. But I still think about that night whenever I pass by the old spot. Life's full of weird little glitches, but most of them have a boring explanation if you dig deep enough. A few months ago, on a crisp autumn evening, I decided to shake off the monotony of my weekly routine by heading out for a casual game of bowling with my cousin Jake. We hadn't hung out much since he started his new job at the warehouse downtown, and I figured a little friendly competition would be the perfect way to catch up. The alley we chose was an old-school spot on the outskirts of town. Faded neon signs, scuffed lanes, and that unmistakable mix of popcorn and shoe polish in the air. It was a Thursday night, not too crowded, just a handful of leagues wrapping up, and a few families with kids giggling over gutter balls. We bowled for about an hour and a half, trading jabs about our terrible form. Jake kept hooking his ball into the left gutter, while I couldn't seem to pick up a spare to save my life. By the end, we were both laughing, a bit sweaty from the effort, and ready to call it a night. The total score? He edged me out by 7 pins, but I blamed it on the sticky lane. As we returned our rented shoes and grabbed our jackets, the clock on the wall showed it was pushing 10 p.m. The lot outside had thinned out considerably. Most folks had already headed home, My car was parked at the far end of the parking lot, under a flickering sodium lamp that cast long, wavering shadows across the asphalt. It was one of those oversized lots that served the alley and a couple of adjacent strip mall stores, all of which were closed by now. The air had turned cooler, with a faint breeze rustling the leaves from the nearby trees that bordered the property. Jake and I chatted idly as we walked. About his job, my latest Netflix binge, nothing profound, just enjoying the easy camaraderie. That's when I first noticed the man. He was standing completely still near the dumpsters at the edge of the lot, maybe 50 feet away from my car. No phone in his hand, no cigarette dangling from his lips, no apparent reason for being there. He wasn't rummaging through the trash or waiting for someone. He was just standing. His posture was rigid, hands at his sides, and even from that distance, I could tell his gaze was fixed on us. It sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "You see that guy?" I muttered to Jake, keeping my voice low. Jake glanced over, his easy smile fading. "Yeah, what's his deal? Creepy as hell." We picked up our pace without saying another word, our footsteps echoing a bit too loudly in the quiet lot. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he was homeless, or waiting for a ride, or just spaced out after a long day. But something about the way he watched us, unblinking and unmoving, made my skin crawl. We reached the car, and I fumbled with my keys for a second before unlocking the doors. We slid in quickly, and I hit the lock button the moment we were inside, the satisfying click providing a small measure of relief. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life, and that's when he moved. Not a sprint or anything dramatic, just slow, deliberate steps in our direction. His head tilted slightly as he approached, like he was studying us. My heart pounded in my chest. Jake gripped the door handle, his knuckles white. "Go, just go," he urged, though his voice was steady. I didn't need telling twice. I threw the car into reverse, backed out of the spot with a squeal of tires, then shifted into drive and floored it toward the exit. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of him stopping in the middle of the lane, turning his head to follow our taillights as we sped away. He didn't chase us or wave, he just watched. We didn't speak for the first couple of blocks, both of us processing the weirdness. Once we hit the main road, Jake let out a nervous laugh. "Man, that was straight out of a bad thriller. You think he was on something?" I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. "No idea. Probably just some dude having a rough night. But yeah, not taking any chances." We drove in relative silence after that, the adrenaline fading into uneasy jokes about avoiding dark parking lots in the future. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I called the bowling alley during my lunch break and asked if they'd had any reports of suspicious activity in the lot. The manager, a gruff older guy named Lou, sighed like he'd heard it before. "Yeah, we've got a regular loiterer out there sometimes. Name's Harold. Harmless vet from the neighborhood. Lives in the apartments across the street. He wanders over when he's having one of his episodes, just stands around staring into space. We've called the cops a few times, but they say he's not breaking any laws. Sorry if he spooked you. We'll keep an eye out." It all clicked then. The stillness, the watching. Not malice, just someone lost in their own world, maybe dealing with PTSD or something similar. Jake and I talked about it later, and we both felt a mix of relief and sympathy. It didn't erase the fear from that night, but it grounded it in reality. I haven't gone back to that alley since. mostly because there are closer spots with better lighting and more crowds. But every now and then, when I'm in a dim parking lot after dark, I scan the shadows a little more carefully, just in case. Life's full of odd moments like that, reminders that not everything sinister is what it seems. One ordinary Friday evening a few years back, I decided to unwind with some bowling at the local alley in my hometown. It was one of those retro places with neon lights flickering overhead, the constant rumble of balls crashing into pins, and that unmistakable scent of popcorn mixed with rented shoe spray. I'd gone alone, just needing a break from a stressful week at work. And after a couple of games where I barely broke 100, I was ready to call it a night. I slipped off my rented bowling shoes, size 8, black and red with the usual worn spots from countless games, and swapped them for my sneakers from the cubby. Holding the rentals in one hand, I joined the short line at the counter to return them and settle up. The line moved slowly. There was a family ahead of me arguing about who won their last frame, and the clerk was dealing with a jammed register. I was zoning out, scrolling through my phone, when I felt someone approach from behind. I glanced up just as a man in his late 30s stepped uncomfortably close enough that I could smell his faint cologne over the alley's ambient odors. He was average height, with tousled brown hair, wearing a faded band t-shirt and jeans, looking like any other casual bowler. Without a word at first, he extended his arm and handed me a pair of bowling shoes. They looked exactly like the ones I was already holding. Same size 8, same black and red design from the alley's standard issue. Even the same scuff marks on the toes and heels that I'd noticed when I first put them on. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as I stared at them. How was this possible? I was gripping my own rentals tightly, the ones I'd been wearing all evening. These couldn't be mine, yet they matched perfectly, down to the little tear in the left lace and the worn patch on the right sole. My mind raced. Had I somehow left them behind at the lane? No, I double-checked. Was this some kind of prank? Before I could process it, he leaned in a bit too close, his voice low and casual, like we were old acquaintances. "We've got a lot in common," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then, just like that, he turned and walked away, weaving through the crowd toward the exit without so much as glancing back or approaching the counter to return any shoes himself. I stood there, dumbfounded, now holding 2 identical pairs. The family ahead of me finally finished, and I stepped up to the counter, my pulse still a little elevated from the weirdness. The clerk, a bored-looking guy in his 20s with a name tag reading Mike, raised an eyebrow when I plunked down both sets. Returning 2 pairs?" he asked, scanning the barcodes. I explained the situation as best I could, how this random guy had just handed me these shoes out of nowhere, claiming we had a lot in common, and then bolted. Mike listened, then chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, that sounds like Jerry. He's a regular here, comes in a few times a week. Probably thought you were his bowling buddy from the league. They all rent the same style shoes, and after a while, they get beat up in similar ways. Let me check the logs." He tapped away at the computer for a moment, then nodded. "Yep, these extras are from lane 12, right next to yours. Jerry must have grabbed the wrong pair when he was packing up. Happens more than you'd think with everyone rushing out. He probably realized his mistake, saw you in line with similar ones, and figured he'd just pass them off quick without making a scene. The lot in common bit. That's his awkward way of flirting or being funny. I've heard him use lines like that before. Harmless guy. But yeah, a bit socially off sometimes. Relief washed over me as the pieces clicked into place. It wasn't some eerie doppelganger scenario or stalker vibe. Just a simple mix-up in a busy alley, amplified by my overactive imagination after a long day. I handed over the cash for my games, thanked Mike for the explanation, and headed out to my car. On the drive home, I even laughed about it, texting a friend the story as a quirky anecdote rather than a chilling tale. These days, whenever I bowl, I make sure to tie a bright ribbon on my rentals, just in case Jerry or anyone else gets confused again. Life's full of those odd little moments, but most of the time, there's a perfectly boring explanation behind them.